Let's go ahead and talk about some of the common file types that you will use with Adobe Photoshop. Now, there are other file types than these that you can use, such as TIFFs and Targas and even SVGs from programs like Illustrator. But for right now, we're just going to go over the basics of some of the more common photo types that we will be using and that you will find as you begin working. So here you can follow along, and I've supplied all of these files for you so that you can follow along with me. And the first file that we have here is cat.psd. We can see the name up in the thumbnail and the document window. And basically, this photo just has two layers. Now, I've unlocked the background layer, so we have just that regular layer showing the cat. I then went and took a quick selection of the background, and I deleted that background and then copied the cat to a new layer. So if we turn off the background and we turn on the cat only layer, you will see that it's just the cat. And that was really easy to do. Again, I just took one of the quick selection tools, selected the background, and refined it a little bit. Then I went to select inverse, grab the cat, Control C to copy, Control V to paste, and brought it into a new layer. I'll show you how to do all that a little bit later on, but for right now I just wanted to show you the process that we extracted the cat from the background, and now this checkerboard pattern in the background is showing that it is transparent. There's actually no background there, just the cat and then nothing behind it, and that'll be useful in a minute as we begin talking. So I've taken this Photoshop file and I've exported out a couple different file formats for you to take a look at. So if we just go up to File and we go to Open, we can see those in the Windows Explorer here. And as you can see, we have multiple cat files, two that say cat with transparency, four labeled just cat, and then our cat PSD file. Well, to make this a little easier to see, I'm going to change the view here. And we have a little bit more information. So we can see when these files were created or edited, we can see the file type, and then we can also see the size of the file. And the size is going to be important because it depends on what you're doing. You may need a small file size, such as for web design. When you're working in web design, you typically want the best looking quality image with the smallest file size, and that's going to be important later on. If you're sending information off to a printer to have something, say, screen printed or printed out for a magazine, you're going to want a higher resolution, and it would be okay to have a higher file size because you're just printing that out. So those types of things you'll want to keep in mind, but let's go ahead and run through these. Now, I'm going to skip the transparencies for right now. We'll talk about that in just a moment, but let's look at some of these other common file types that you'll be using. So first we have what is called a CR2 file, and this is a very interesting one. If I hover over it, it shows me when it was taken, and it shows information about the camera that took it. So this was actually taken with a Canon EOS 650D. It shows the ISO speed, the f-stop, and the exposure time. That's going to be really important. We call this a raw file, a raw camera file. And basically, the way that a raw camera file works is that it's unprocessed and it's not compressed, and it's basically the information that's being pulled directly from the camera. This is great in Photoshop because what it means is we can bring this file in and we can adjust it as if we were adjusting the settings of our actual camera. I'm going to show you how to do that at the end, so we'll come back to that file. Then we have three more files. We have a GIF, a JPG, and a PNG. Now, these are probably going to be the most common file types that you'll see for photos and images. And they all pretty much do the same thing. They take a picture. Some have other caveats than the other ones. So for instance, the first one is a GIF file. These are compressed. They don't have any transparent backgrounds, but I'm sure you've heard of animated GIFs or animated GIFs as they're sometimes called. And basically that is those animated files that you see on social media that might be a couple seconds long, and it shows an animation or shows a TV show or a funny meme or something like that. Those are made with GIF files, and you can see that its file size is about 2.2 megabytes or 2,257 kilobytes here. The next one after that is the JPG file. This is one of the most common image file types that you will see, especially on the internet, because they are compressed. They are reduced down to the bare minimum of what you need to make this image look great while keeping the file size very small. And that's, again, very important for things like web design. So you can see this is a JPG file, and that's 1.9 megabytes or 1,941 kilobytes. So it's the smallest file size out of these three here. Then finally, we have the PNG file, which is also another very common file. And the difference between this and the JPG is two different things. First of all, the PNG file is not compressed. So it's not trying to save file size, and it's not using an algorithm to compress it down to a smaller file size. You get a full 5 megabytes of information, or 5,065 kilobytes. The other thing about PNGs is they can retain transparent backgrounds or transparency information inside of them. And that is really great when we want to have a blank or a transparent background and just have our image. And that's what these two transparency images, I'll show you how that works here in just a moment. So let's just go ahead and open up these three files, the GIF, the JPG, and the PNG. I can click on one and hold Shift to select all, or I can hold the Control or the Command button and select multiple files, and we'll hit open, and it's going to open these up for me. So we have our original cat.psd file. You see it's at 25%. I actually dropped the resolution a little bit on these other files just to make them a little smaller. So we have our original PSD file. Then we have cat.gif, and then we have cat.jpg, and then we have cat.png. And as you might notice, there's not much of a change in between these images. Especially if you're watching this video, it's probably going to be harder to see than what I'm seeing because I'm getting full resolution and uncompressed video. But if you were to take these images and scrub through them, you might see some small changes and maybe a little bit difference, but they look very similar. And if you remember, the GIF file is compressed. It's about 2 megabytes, and we can use this to create animated. We could have this cat dancing around or something like that. Then we have the JPG file, which is the most compressed file and the smallest file size. And then we have the big PNG file, which is at 5 megabytes. It's retaining a little more information, but you can't tell a huge difference between the JPG and the PNG. And so if you were posting this image on the internet, you don't want to post the 5 megabyte PNG file because it's going to take longer for the website to load that up if you're doing maybe web design. However, you would want to use the cat.jpg file because it's a smaller file size and it still looks as good as the PNG file. So again, why would we use a PNG file? Well, it comes down to using the transparent background. And if we go back to the Photoshop file, as I showed you before, what we have here is we have the cat only with the transparent background and then our background layer. So let's hide the background layer, and now we're just going to see the cat only layer, and it has a transparent background, which means I can stick this cat on my website, and whatever is behind wherever I stick this cat, say it's a picture of a field, we'll see that field. Or if I want to come in Photoshop and change the background to something else like a beach, I can do that. For instance, let me just create a new layer. I'm going to move it underneath the cat only layer so that it's behind the cat. And I'm just going to pick a random color. Let's just do like a green so that it's easy to see the difference. And I'm going to fill this full layer. And then now you can see what happens. Now the selection wasn't that great because I was just doing it quickly, and you can see a white haze around the cat. Of course, we would want to fix that up. But basically, if I hide the cat only layer, we just have a green background, and now we have the cat in front of it, so the cat doesn't have any background information associated with it. So when I remove that green background, that's why we see the checkerboard pattern. So the difference between the PNG and the JPG file is JPG files will not save transparent information. Though they're compressed and smaller, they don't know that there's not a background there, and typically it just fills it with white. And then that's not what you want, because if you want to put this cat over a beach or over your website, the white background is going to get in the way, and we'll never see that background, such as the beach. However, if we use the PNG file, it will save that background information. And then when we put that over the beach, we'll actually see the beach or whatever background you're using. So let's open up those other two files that we saw in the beginning, cat with transparency.jpg and cat with transparency.png. If I open these files up, these aren't PSD files, they're actual image files. But when I go to the JPG, it filled it in with white, which means that there is a background there and you're not going to be able to overlay this cat onto anything else. However, with a PNG file, we can totally do that because, again, we see the checkerboard pattern in the background showing that there's no transparency there. So those are the three common file types that you will typically see when working with images: the GIF, the JPG, and the PNG, and those are some of the differences. Let's go ahead and take a look at the last file type, and this was the camera raw file that we saw in the beginning, and there's different versions of raw files. This is a CR2 file, and we're going to open this up. And when we open it up in Photoshop, we're given a different screen. We're given the camera raw screen. It didn't just open it up in the document window because it's automatically giving the ability to adjust the raw file before we open it or save it out into Photoshop. And this is very powerful because we have all of these tools at the top, such as white balancing, color sampling, adjusting, cropping, perspective, removing red eye, and all these other adjustments. And then we have camera settings that we can actually adjust based on the camera that this picture was taken with. So for instance, I can go ahead and start adjusting things such as the temperature of this image, or maybe it didn't expose enough and I want to expose it more, or it got too exposed and I want to drop that down. I have the ability to adjust these right here with this camera raw filter. I can adjust the clarity, the vibrance, all these great adjustments that we can do right here. And then there's more regarding the camera. So we have tonal curves that we can adjust. We can do detail such as sharpening and noise reduction. We can do hue saturation levels and grayscale, split toning, lens correction if we need to correct the lens, different effects like dehazing or adding grain or vignetting. You can calibrate the camera to whatever type of camera you're using. You can save out or add presets, and then you can actually take snapshots of your different versions. So this camera raw file, if you imagine, it's basically like we're controlling the camera itself. When you go into your camera and you're adjusting things on your camera, we have the ability to do that here. Because this file is not compressed, we're getting the full file, the full resolution, and the full information, and we can make those adjustments here. And as we change things around, you will see how it changes our f-stop and our ISO and all those different things that we have. So once we're done with this, we can save it out, we can open it up inside of Photoshop and begin working on it. So I'll just go ahead and hit open up. And then it brings that image in as a layer with all of those changes that we made. And we can always go back and adjust the original raw file later on. So if you're doing a lot of photography work, you're probably going to always be using raw files, or typically be using raw files, hopefully, because it's going to give you a lot more control over that image. Now, I do want to give a shout out to a website that I got this image from. If you want to practice with raw files, you can find royalty-free images on the internet by doing a search, but I just wanted to show where I found this image, so I'll open that up. And the website that I used is called wesaturate.com. Again, there's a lot of these different types of websites, but here you can see we have the picture of this cat with some edits that they made, and we have a raw download button at the top and a JPG button at the top. So we can download either one of those, and if we scroll down, we can see who took this image and the date that it was published on, and then also all the information of the camera that was used. So if you want to mess around with raw files and play around and check them out, or if you want some practice but you don't have a camera to take photos, you can find websites like these on the internet, and it'll allow you to pull up those raw files in Photoshop and begin practicing. So hopefully that gives you a brief understanding of the common file types that you'll be using in Photoshop, whether it be a Photoshop PSD file, a camera raw file, or an image file like a GIF or a JPG or a PNG file. Hopefully that'll get you started. There's a lot more files that Photoshop can read, but these will probably be the common ones that you'll see most often.